So hello, everyone. We want to welcome you to this program of the University of Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center. We are so pleased to be able to bring you these educational programs to help support small businesses in the region and the state. Please be advised that we will be recording this webinar for ASBTDC education purposes. If you are not familiar with ASBTDC, it is a one-stop shop for startups and existing small businesses. We are affiliated with the statewide ASBTDC as well as a national network of more than 1,000 small business centers. Locally, we offer free one-on-one consulting and workshops like this one, covering the relevant topics for business owners. And if you are not already a client, we encourage you to visit us at sbtdc.uark.edu. I will introduce John and Carl of CBI momentarily. In the meantime, I'm Amy Robinson. I'm a consultant with the ASBTDC, and today we will very shortly, hopefully, be joined by our center director, Mary Beth Brooks, and also my colleague, Catherine Corley, who's also a consultant. They are going to be helping guide the conversation today with John and Carl about buying and selling a business, a very hot topic, and we're excited that you're here joining us. So a little bit about how everything is going to work today. We are in webinar format. So this means that you are on mute, but we also want this to be interactive. So please participate via the Q&A or the chat. We will be monitoring the questions as well as asking for some of our own questions because we don't know everything. And this is a fascinating conversation, and we'll be facilitating those as we go along. If you wish to stay anonymous, you can participate via the Q&A feature, and there's a way to select anonymous in there. We also have our colleague, Chris Case, hello Chris, with you in the chat. And so if you prefer that feature and interacting with each other or with us, you can use that as well. She may even throw a few questions of her own in there. So now we are happy to introduce our workshop or panelists, John and Carl. As I mentioned, they have a little bit of an intro for you to get to know them and the CBI team. And then we're going to kick off our Q&A. So I hope that you enjoy this and stick around. We will give you some information at the end about how you can get this presentation. So if everyone is ready, without further ado, we will get this show going. So maybe, there we go. John and Carl, are you ready?
Yes, we're ready.
All right, and away we go.
Well, I guess I'll kick this off just by telling you that John Holbert is the managing partner for our Northwest Arkansas office of CBI. And I'm the founder of CBI, founded back in 1994. And we have 4 offices scattered around Arkansas and Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we specialize in selling businesses. That's what we've been doing since 1994. And we've sold over 800 businesses during that period of time. So, John, you have anything you want to add to that little intro?
No, that about covers it.
Fantastic.
We have about 30 people on our staff too, just as an FYI, scattered again across the 4 offices. So, and one of the beauties of what we have is a tremendous variety of experience in business ownership. Everything from folks who've owned major manufacturing and distribution businesses to pawn shops and newspapers and cable TV companies. So for the audience, I'm not sure what businesses you're in or how your interest is, but we've probably got somebody that's got experience with it.
Absolutely. And of course, again, please utilize the chat. And if you want to let us know what business you're in, or you can put that into the Q&A feature, then we will be able to let everyone know what industry you're in. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, we specialize, Amy, in selling Main Street businesses. That was kind of our bread and butter, and mom and pop businesses, and to classify them pretty broadly, a business whose value is under $2 million, we would consider that a Main Street business, mom and pop. But over the last few years, we've made an entry into the lower mid-market mergers and acquisition business. We recently closed on a business that was a $30 million business, and the buyer was out of Singapore. The seller was in Minneapolis, and we were in Northwest Arkansas and Central Arkansas. So, we've got that broad range of experience. None are really too small, and we like to limit ourselves to privately held companies. So, if that gives you some more background on us. I know I see we just had a chat from someone who's in an in-house service business. We closed a couple of weeks ago. We sold a senior care business that was no longer in-home. It started that way. We sold it to a Canadian publicly traded company, which was really interesting. The business was based in Fort Smith, but we went cross-border with that small business, and it was a relatively small business. So we're seeing some things happen in this COVID area. They're a little bit different.
Well, I think let's go ahead and dive into some questions. And Catherine?
Yes, I was just going to share with everyone, there's a lot of interest in buying and selling businesses. COVID has been a disruptor in many instances, but it's also a time of opportunity. There are people who want to get out of their business. Maybe they're retiring and they want to sell their business. There's other people who find themselves in a position of wanting to buy a business. So it's really a good time to be able to evaluate it. And that's why we're having the session today. We've heard this interest from our clients and also from CBI clients. And we have about 10 questions that we're going to go through. They're going to hopefully answer all your questions about selling a business, why, and how to go about it. So Amy, I think we're ready to kick it off.
Absolutely. And just so everybody knows, again, while we're asking questions, your questions are very, very vital as well. And we do have a couple of other comments about some of the other industries, Carl and John. Construction, they also have their own art business and are a banker. What a combination of diverse experiences. And we also have a restaurant business on with us today. So thank you all and continue to put those industries in or add your own questions. We will be consolidating those and throwing those out there as we go along. So yes, let's get started. Thank you. Can you see that one up there, Catherine?
Yes. So let's get started. John and Carl, who is selling businesses and why?
Well, that's a big topic and a lot to talk about there. There are just about any business owner, unless he's going to pass his business down through the family or close it, is going to be a seller at some point or another. And sometimes that's a well-planned, long process where they have been planning to sell. Other times there may be a family or health crisis that forces the sale quicker than they anticipated. And more we're seeing people that are buying businesses with the intent to sell over a period of time. So they'll buy one and build it up and sell it and then buy another one. In fact, we had an inquiry about that yesterday, Carl and I did. So Carl, your thoughts on that would be good too.
Well, I think one of the things that we have noticed, and it's been talked about for the past dozen years, is what some people are calling the silver wave tsunami. Now, silver wave refers to silver hair. They could change that to bald tsunami too. But older people, baby boomers, are moving back through the economy. And every time boomers have gone through the economy, they've changed the economy. They've shifted the ends of it. And so now they're beginning to exit their businesses. And this is kind of strange because it's a delayed thing. And it's delayed for a couple of reasons why boomers are selling a little bit later. One is there was no really good place for them to take the liquidity that they got out of the sale of the business and put the money. So the stock market's been volatile. Real estate has had some ups and downs. So they were kind of nervous about selling because their business was providing a good solid income for them. But now they're reaching a point where they need to sell. The other thing that happened was boomers are more healthy than usual. And so than it used to be historically. So they've lasted longer and they're hanging on their businesses longer. Now, John referred to something that's really unusual, and that is we've seen a shift where when I first got into the business, it wasn't unusual to see people that had owned a business 30 years or 40 years. But the millennials, the younger folks, are buy and sell. So about 5 years after they buy a business, they're looking to sell and move on to the next adventure. So those are some people that are selling, and some are selling because they are distressed. And that's a difficult thing because most buyers are not looking to buy distressed businesses. They're looking to buy cash flowing businesses, businesses that are making money. But by the converse or the reverse, there are investors out there who are really seeking to buy businesses that are under pressure, but at the same time, they want the cash flow. So you got a real variety. Every story is different in selling and buying.
Carl, we do have a couple more industries popping up, a security alarm company and a general contracting company. Would it also be helpful to know as we're kind of going along and answering questions if people are in the buying or selling market while we have these attendees here?
Sure, we'd be happy to answer any questions about it, and we'll keep it as confidential as they choose to make it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you know if you are in the market to buy or sell at this point in time, as you're also putting your industry out there, that might be helpful information for all of us to know as we're going along and answering questions. Catherine?
So who is the average buyer? If we can, yes, move to the next question. We've heard about who is selling, but I think Carl and John were interested in seeing, about the average buyer that you see. And I know at ASBTDC, two that we've seen in the last few weeks are, big company executives looking for an exit and evaluating buying a business as a way they might move into their retirement.
Yeah, we've seen some really surprising things in COVID, what I call, not so jokingly, COVID-geddon, because it's been a devastating thing for many people. But we have seen a lot of buyers coming into the market. But if you think about it, a lot of these buyers are what we call corporate refugees, Catherine. They're people that have lost their jobs. And they've gone out into the job market and they're finding out there aren't any jobs out there that are commensurate with what they had. So that's one group of buyers, the corporate refugees who got what we call the pink slip virus. And they're coming into the market looking to replace an income. And then there are these investors we referred to earlier. We get inquiries from all over the world about businesses. And some are bottom feeders. They're out there scavenging. But we find much more people who are looking to buy businesses with good cash flow. The larger buyers will hold and sell for a little while. The Main Street buyers, the people that are buying businesses for an income, tend to hold a little bit longer. John, do you have any thoughts about that question?
Yeah, there's certainly a larger number, it seems like, of average of buyers coming into the market right now, and a lot more corporate refugees. But some of those buyers are also corporate employees who would like to leave that life and run something of their own. And so, we hear that quite a lot. Some of them would like an absentee situation where they can keep their day job and buy something for later or for a backup. And then probably one of the bigger categories now is private investment groups or investors that are looking to buy a business, grow it or combine it or expand it and then sell it, and sometimes even roll up a bunch of businesses and then take it public or whatever. So you've got a large segment of buyers there that are just strictly investors.
Fantastic. And we do have a couple of questions. I know you have a great little video to show and talk a little bit about the buying and selling portion of that. We do have a question on the buying and selling. One is what kind of businesses are sold more often? Like what sectors are they sold most often in that capacity that you're seeing?
John, you want to tackle that one?
Wow, it's very hard to say that there's any one in particular genre of business. I mean, we've sold trades businesses, service businesses, restaurants, retail, online, tech, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
A good business, a good profitable business that has taken care of things and done their paperwork right will sell.
Yeah, doesn't make any difference necessarily. Because we get so many different inquiries, one of the things that we have found is there is no average buyer. We have found that 95% of the people that contact us about buying a certain business, they come in through one of our marketing arenas. They don't buy the business they inquire about. They will buy another business because we walk them through buyer discovery, where they begin to learn what this world looks like. Because most people coming out of a corporate background have no idea about small privately held businesses. So we have to educate them. And as they get educated, they broaden their horizons and they'll often pick out another business. I think, John, you've got a video that you have from someone that on both the selling and the buying side, don't you?
Yeah, I think that, it's good to hear it from those buyers and sellers' perspectives and how it actually worked for them. So we brought this video.
Let's run it.
When I first thought about selling my business, I had this idea from general knowledge that I'd heard about what my business was worth. And I came to you and brought all my information, and you came back and you actually said it was worth more than what I thought, which was a great surprise. And then going to closing, that's what we got. So that was everybody agreed that was the value of the business. So I was glad to get that opinion from y'all, and it definitely benefited us. I was very surprised that I did so much more throughout the whole thing than what I thought you were going to do originally. You told me up front what you're going to do for me, but then I didn't realize what you're going to do for my buyer to make it possible for him to go through. So that was so much more that you brought to the table than I even thought about when I first signed up. So you held his hand, you held my hand, and you made it happen. Without you, it would have happened.
Never done it, was not sure what to do or how to even get started. When we first started the conversation, and I did start contacting my banks and trying to get a loan and was being told no, and I was going, oh boy, now what? So sitting down with Kelly and having that conversation, and his confidence and his job of finding the loans really helped me have confidence to go forward with the process that we could find somebody to do the funding. And that was my biggest concern right out of the gate was, well, I can't do this unless I find funding that's going to work and it's going to be affordable based on the income of the business. And we found a solution that it works, and gave me confidence to still go forward and say yes on the entire deal. We had 10 come back in less than a week that said yes, we would do it.
I appreciate that everything you said has come true, like you said, and I trusted you at the beginning, and you have stepped up and proven your trust to be well placed. So y'all lived up to what you said you're going to do, and you don't really see that these days. So I appreciate it, and you did a great job.
Fantastic. Thank you all for sharing that video with us. That is a great, great video. Thank you. I just want to say hello to Mary Beth. She is here with us now. Hello, Mary Beth.
Hey guys, I'm so sorry. I cannot tell you the technical problems I've had so far today. So.
We were talking about the technical problems, and so it's wonderful to have you back. We'll go ahead and I know that Catherine, we've got some questions in the chat. Hopefully that video at the very least gave you a really good sense of what the experience with CBI is. And Catherine is going to address some of the questions that are coming up in the chat, because we've got great participants today and they have great questions.
Yes, this one is really timely. John and Carl. So Dean is asking that, initially they were thinking about selling their business in a few years because they're retiring. However, their industry is connected to the home building industry. And so right now they're doing very, very well. And they've been counseled in the past that they should always sell their business on a high. So do you sometimes advise selling earlier than the client is thinking?
Oh, yes, we do. But good preparation takes time to be ready to sell. Running a business and selling a business are two different things. And so you're running it successfully, and now is a really good time to prepare it for sale. We like to get with the seller 2 to 4 years before they're ready to start the process. That way we can help them organize their records, clean the books up, check inventory, FF&E, all those kinds of things, and then put it on the market. So getting it early in the process, and particularly when it's on the upswing, drives value very much for a business. So you should be getting ready now to exit in the next 12 to 24 months. John, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that there are deals that can be made that help you participate in the continued growth of your company. So, sometimes we'll do an earn out with a seller who has a really steep upward trend so that they get to participate in the profits of the company even after they've sold it. So there's a way to sell while the company is on its way up and still participate in those profits. Also, while we would love for folks to come to us 2 to 4 years in advance, well, it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes, as I said, a family crisis or a health crisis forces an immediate or quick sale, and we're prepared for that too. We can help them in that instance.
Well, we had one dental, this is an unusual situation, Catherine, but we had a dental practice in Gravette that literally ran a quarter-page ad in the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette announcing they were closing down their practice and thanking everybody for it. And we called the dentist and said, why didn't you let us list and sell this for you? He said, well, I didn't think you could do anything with it. Within 2 weeks, we had an offer that was accepted and closed within 4 weeks. Now, that's unusual, but he was about to walk away from hundreds of thousands of dollars. So people need to explore this pretty early rather than waiting till the last minute to do it.
Absolutely. Well, I know that we do have, we've got a couple of other questions. I think that, you are getting into some great details today, especially in the process of buying and selling. We're about to jump into stock sale versus asset sale. But I just want everybody to know that if we haven't addressed your question immediately, it's because we think it's probably going to come up a little bit later, and we are holding on to those. So we will get those in. So keep them coming. Don't stop. And we'd love to have those questions.
Amy, I want to ask this question if you don't mind, because I have a big question, looming question. Hopefully you guys can understand me since I'm on a laptop.
Nope, you're great.
My main concern is, or not concern, it's issue. I probably have 3 clients right now who are doing asset sales or asset purchases or sales, one or the other. And then a couple who are doing stock deals, one selling, one buying. And I think it's important for this group, for all the listeners, to understand the difference between an asset sale and a stock sale, and then what all is involved. Because the majority of what I see from our perspective are stock or asset sales and not stock sales, but everybody seems to be really hesitant always to go down that path, even though it typically has worked out pretty well. So can one of you guys explain difference just so our listeners will understand?
I'll take the first pass at that, Carl, if you don't care. So,
Sure.
a lot of times people think of an asset sale and they think of only, tangible assets. And most businesses, profitable businesses, have many intangible assets, goodwill being the biggest of which. So sometimes people think of assets as, well, whatever you can touch, but there's more to it than that. So an asset sale is going to sell, obviously, the assets of your business. It doesn't sell the entity. Your entity survives the sale, and sometimes for a period of time, depending on how that all works. So you keep your entity and you sell your assets. A stock sale, you are going to sell the entity, including usually a defined amount of cash and all the inventory and the actual entity itself. So
And receivables.
And so the stock sale, a stock sale is usually reserved for larger companies that and the asset sales usually you see on the smaller companies. It's not always that way, but a lot of times buyers are hesitant on a stock sale because they are assuming the contingent liability of that company. Carl, I'm sure can tell you more about that.
Yeah, 99% of what we do are asset sales, particularly on Main Street businesses. It's a clear-cut way to do things. Buyer and seller both are very comfortable with an asset sale as a general rule. Stock sales are much more complicated. The attorneys love these because they can really run the fees up in doing the stock sales, and there's some liability there too. So we have to be careful because when you buy the contingent liabilities, a seller may try to tell you everything they know that happened to that business, but there's a period of time that an unknown liability may pop up and the seller could be liable, the buyer could be liable for that unknown liability, which can be a big thing. Also, there's such a thing as treble damages if a judge or a court ever found out that there was any misrepresentation. And so stock sales often carry reps and warranties, representations and warranties to try to protect the buyer from things that might have happened that nobody really knew about. And if those reps and warranties are not complete, then that could be a liability to the seller that's pretty dangerous. So most of the businesses that we do are asset sales. And again, I'm glad John mentioned goodwill. Goodwill is a measurable entity of a business. Now, if anybody's listening who's thinking about selling, don't use the term blue sky. Use the term goodwill. Blue sky is immeasurable. It's a really high thing, but goodwill is measurable and you should be paid for goodwill. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth here in a minute. Hopefully that helps, Mary Beth.
It does very much. My last little bit on that is tell me about, like, I understand when somebody's doing an asset sale and they're buying the inventory and the products that they're selling and those kind of things. But what about like a website that's a really strong website? How does that go through that transaction on an asset sale?
John, you want to tackle it?
Yeah, there's a process that we do. It's a checklist that we go through for phone numbers, websites, lists of contacts, vendors, key customers, whatever those things are that make that business tick. We go through all of that and make sure that those things transfer. So we've kind of become experts at figuring out how to transfer internet websites from one person to the other. And it wasn't on purpose, but we had to do it.
Yeah, there's a making sure, because that's part of the goodwill of that company. And of course, we also have patents, trademarks. We have other intellectual properties that have to be transferred too. So, and we work very closely with the attorneys for the seller and the buyer. And our company uses a closing attorney. A third-party attorney doesn't represent the seller or the buyer or us. And that third-party attorney is the one who makes sure that all the transfer documents and documentation are taken care of appropriately. That's a licensed Arkansas attorney.
That's wonderful. What do you think about this one, Mary Beth?
I'm just curious. Kind of give us a quick rundown from beginning to end on a sale, because what seems to run it. Sorry, I'm echoing.
It's all right. Catherine, you want to pop in real quick and cue us up on this one? Oh, can't hear you, Catherine.
Oh, sorry.
I'm back. I'm so
All
sorry.
right. That's all right.
Can you guys hear me now? I'm so sorry.
Yep.
I've got
Yes.
T help. I've got everybody's help trying to help us get the line. So finally, I'm back in kind of somewhat a normal position. I was curious of the business, of what you guys envision as the business sale process, because, and you all maybe have already talked about this, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating what you guys have already said, but we help so many clients in people purchasing businesses and selling businesses. And it's an ongoing challenge for us on how many people who say, okay, listen, I'm decided I need to move and I need to sell my business and I need to be out and sold and completed in 90 days or whatever, depending on what their situation is. But also, I just want everybody to understand what you all envision and what your process tells us as to how to sell their business.
Yeah, we've got quite a process that we follow. In fact, it's based on Mayo Clinic. And I know that may sound a little strange to you, but Mayo Clinic is very well known for having a medical process, a step-by-step way of approaching medicine that determines the problem, physical problems that someone is dealing with and comes up with a diagnosis in a fairly quick time. So we follow that process. That process doesn't happen overnight. And I think Mary Beth referred to somebody that had called her and said, listen, I want to be out of my business by Thanksgiving. Can I do that? And the answer is yes, just lock the door and walk away. But that's about the only way that's going to work, because you're leaving the goodwill of that business behind when you close that door and pull the shades down. So the only way you're going to get anything out of that business is to use one of our other resources that we're reluctant to use. That is an auction. John is a licensed auctioneer, and if the business is only the assets left, then we can do that. But if you want to maximize your business, the value of your business, give us some time to gather the information, follow our process, and expose it to the largest market that there is available to get you the goodwill and the intangible assets, get you paid for those too. Average time to sell a business is 6 to 18 months. And we follow the closer end because of our process. John, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think our average right now is running 7 or 8 months is kind of where we've been. And some of that's, we've done deals in 21 days, and then we've had deals that have taken much longer. It just kind of depends on, there's a smaller universe of buyers for some businesses than others. So it just kind of depends on what you're selling. But, I think the next slide, we can kind of step through the process a little bit and show you kind of what they are. And this slide sort of builds. So what, Carl, you want to take the first few and then I'll do the last few?
Yeah, let me go ahead. The first thing, typically we'll get a call from a business owner and they'll say, I'm interested in selling my business. We'll go meet with them when we can. Pre-COVID, it was a requirement we had, but in the middle of COVID, sometimes we can't meet with them physically, and we'll get them a checklist of information to begin to gather. Now, this checklist of information is pretty detailed, because we know that going through this process, there's going to be a point at which a buyer, their CPA, and a lender are going to want to know what makes this business tick. So we get the seller to gather this checklist of information and pull that together so that we can help that seller begin to move forward. Let's go on to the next one there, Amy. Once we have those in-depth numbers, which do come from tax returns, profit and loss statements, balance sheets, those kinds of things, we'll do a recast of the financials. Now, one of the things I've learned is we speak a different language than most people do. So let me define recast for you. One of the things we can't find, Amy, is a business owner who on April 15th raises her hand and says, can I pay some more taxes? So they don't want to do that. They want to minimize their taxes. So they will take every legitimate expense that they can and run it through the company, even though that expense may not be directly related to the operation of that business. So in other words, it becomes a discretionary item. So we'll go back through with the seller's help and identify these discretionary items and add them back to create the cash flow of the business. So we do the recast. Next slide. John, why don't you talk about internal due diligence? You and I talked about it this morning.
Yeah, so the next part of that for us is to share that information with the rest of our team. As Carl said earlier, as many folks as we have on our team now, it's interesting that almost every time we've got somebody on our team that has either sold a business like that or owned a business like that or ran a business like that. And so we talk about the different aspects of that business, what we think a range of value is, what the universe of buyers looks like, how we would, potential ways that we would market that company and find that perfect buyer. And so that's done as a team. Next part there.
Sometimes easier said than done. Cursors are, well, cursed sometimes.
Yeah, that's why they call them that.
Well, yeah, there you go.
So this kind of ties in with what I was saying before, and just doing our assessments and analyze the marketability. It's easier to sell a tech company than it is a buggy whip company. And so you kind of have to figure out, which one is which. We can move to the next slide there if the cursor agrees. We'll create that marketing strategy. So one size doesn't fit all when it comes to marketing a business. You would certainly market a auto repair shop differently than you would a tech company, in a different way altogether. So we create that marketing strategy that's one-off, that's just for that business. And sometimes that'll include trade magazines or trade associations or whatever those things are for that individual business. Carl?
Well, once we've done that, we will bring the seller in or Zoom with the seller, kind of go over our findings, the strengths and weaknesses that we've located in the business, and then we'll interview the seller. Now, those of you who are thinking about selling, don't get scared here. We want to get inside your mind and your heart and find out where you want to be and figure out if we can lay out a plan to help you achieve your goals. So we have 26 different questions on that seller interview to probe into your motivation and what you're planning on doing post-closing, those kinds of things, because we know that certainly on Main Street, this is typically a very difficult thing for most business owners. So there's some psychology involved in this as we want to understand that. So we share the seller. Seller sometimes fills in some gaps of things that we might have missed, and that's really helpful for us. So doing that brings the seller solidly on board, and they understand the path that we're going to lay out for them. Next slide, Amy. We talked about the custom marketing above, and that custom marketing, we're very fortunate in that we have marketed, golly, I have no idea how many different kinds of businesses, but we create that plan for each one. A quick story for you. Several years ago, I listed a hardwood flooring business for sale, very good one. And in this particular business, I was trying to figure out unique ways of marketing it very quickly. Well, I found out that there was a hardwood flooring society. And so when I did, I contacted them, and they had a bulletin board. I said, may I post this business for sale? Now, it's a generic listing, so nobody could tell where the business was located, just that there was a hardwood flooring business for sale. An international board. Well, that day that I posted it on the board, I got a call from Springdale, Arkansas, from a guy who manufactured sanders for the hardwood flooring. And he saw it on that bulletin board and immediately called, and he bought the business. So everything is customized. And we don't do what our real estate friends do. They go out and put a sign out in front of the business or in front of a piece of property and hope everybody sees it. Well, we can't do that, because if the employees, if the customers, if the vendors find out a business is being sold, it can hurt that business drastically. So everything that we do is confidential and generic so that we can bring the best buyers in. Next slide, Amy. John, pick it up from there.
Yeah, so part of that customized marketing is once they've hired us to represent them, then we're going to create a couple of documents. One is the blind profile that Carl was talking about. And it is what we advertise with, and it never says the name or even the location of the company. It might say, auto repair dealership located in Ozark Town or whatever. And so it's all blind, and then people would inquire off of that. The other thing that we create is about a 25 to 35 page document that's full color. It looks like a magazine that is a brochure on that business. It talks about the history of the business. It talks about the owners. It talks about some high level number information, and there's all kinds of information in there about the business and about the market area in which it's located. So we have so many people coming in here from outside. We have a lot of information in there about Northwest Arkansas or Central or wherever the business is located. So when we created that marketing plan earlier, then we activate it. So we say, okay, here's the things we said we were going to do. We start doing those things, and we start marketing with that blind profile in all those different places. I think we can move to the next one now, Amy.
I think Catherine has a quick question.
Okay, good.
Yes, John, from one of our attendees would like to understand, how do you determine the value of a business?
That's a great question.
We've got coming up later on, or is that question not in there?
Yes, that's coming up in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Getting all of our bases covered.
I want to add something in there just to let people know. That's one of the things that we also work. We work a lot with our clients who are buying and selling businesses as well. So we are not business brokers. We don't get involved in that. Obviously, everything we do is free of charge, but we just help folks when they're just trying to analyze both on selling as well as on buying. We dig through financials and really do a lot of market research with them to make sure that they understand either what business how they will fit into the new business that they are buying, or how it will work for them if they are selling. So we do a lot of that same kind of work and work hand in hand with different brokers and whatever when they're selling.
Yeah, we're your partner.
It's,
absolutely.
So the next thing that we do as we market with that blind profile is we start getting people that are interested, and we start fielding those buyers. Now, it's not, it happens fairly often where somebody who has a very low budget has a very high taste in price of business. So there's a pre-screening process that goes on. And we try to find the right business for that person's financial capacity. And we get other information from them. Obviously, we get a non-disclosure agreement. Everything we do is confidential. So we get the non-disclosure agreement, we get financial information, and then we get what we call our dream sheet. And it tries to measure what that particular buyer is interested in, what things in their life are they interested in. Small business owners know that it can be grueling. You work hard and you work all the time. Even when you're not at work, you're at work. So it needs to be something that you have passion about and that you're excited about. I think we can move to the next slide, and then that'll be Carl. Yeah. Yeah.
The confidentiality is such a key. And that's why the name of our company is Confidential Business Intermediaries. I remember when I was thinking about getting into this business back in 1994, I met with Jim Lindsay, who is a friend of mine. And Jim, of course, is one of the great real estate moguls of Arkansas. And Jim looked at me and very seriously said, "Carl, how do you sell a secret?" And I said, "Jim, I can tell you, but if I do, I'll have to kill you." And we laughed about that. But marketing a secret is something that we have perfected over the past 25 plus years. How do you keep it quiet until you identify the right buyer to whom you're going to begin to disclose things? We have those techniques worked out. Next one, Amy. We talked about the buyer documentation, and we put sellers through a fairly fine screen of gathering the information. We do the same thing with a buyer. One of the worst things that we can have happen is have a prospective buyer come in, waste a seller's time, waste our time, and that buyer is not able to pull that off. Another thing that we found too, Mary Beth, you may have run into this already, is that recently the SBA has become really much more difficult to deal with in terms of prior experience in a certain type of business. So if we've got a heating and air business now that we've got under contract, one of our buyers had experience 7 years ago with HVAC. Well, SBA says that's not enough. You need to have more immediate experience. So we're working to retain one of the high-level employees in the business to help that person be able to obtain the SBA loan. So we're going to make sure that that buyer is qualified financially, has the proper motivation and the background to be able to do it. Let's go to the next one. Okay, disclosing the business, and that in and of itself is more of an art than it is science, how we do that. John, you want to pick that up and run with it?
Sure. So once we think that this is the right buyer, or at least a qualified buyer for that business, then we're going to disclose it to them. We're in doing so, we're going to do that on the phone. We're going to tell them some of the attributes of the company, talk through it. Obviously, we'd love to do it in person, but that doesn't happen as much as it used to. And then we're going to give them access to an online confidential deal room or data room that gives them access to that confidential business review that I mentioned earlier, the brochure that we build. And so it's going to give them that information, and it's going to give them the recasted financials. So they'll be able to see what the financial performance of the company has been over at least a 3-year period. Sometimes we show 3 years, sometimes more, but at least 3-year period, they'll be able to see the financial performance of that company. Then the only thing they can do in that room is go in there and read it. They can't print that stuff off, and they can't email it to themselves or whatever. I suppose they could take a picture of it with their phone or something, but we try to limit that. We try to do nothing on paper because we don't want the confidentiality to be broken. Next one, please, Amy. The next step in the process, after we've disclosed the business and the buyer says, hey, I really like this, I want to learn more about it, then we're going to host a buyer-seller meeting. And the purpose of that meeting is to let the two individuals meet each other and visit and talk and hopefully develop good chemistry between them, because they're going to need it. It's a long process and they need to get along with each other. So we're trying to describe how the business operates, what kind of things that the owner does on a daily basis, so that the buyer gets a view of what his life would be like as an owner of that company. It's not a financial due diligence meeting. That comes later. Carl, you wanted to take the next one?
Sure. We believe strongly in contingent letters of intent. I don't know how many of you have read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but in that there is a chapter that says make offers, make an offer. And this is our payon to the make an offer. Once the buyer and seller have met one another, the buyer has already seen the high-level financial information, and the buyer's had access to the seller asking questions, digging into the deal. By the way, those meetings will last anywhere from an hour to 4 hours between the seller and buyer. Once that meeting is over, we have trained the buyer in the discovery meeting to write a contingent letter of intent. Now, I want to stop right here and tell you that no, the buyer has not seen the seller's tax returns or financial statements at this point. They've seen the recast, which comes directly from those financial instruments. But we don't disclose tax returns because I don't know how many of you have ever looked at tax returns of a small business. If you can fully explain those to me, we have a job waiting for you. Tax returns are always set up to pay the minimum of taxes. So to just hand them to a buyer who has never owned a business before and ask them to understand it is a recipe for a disaster. So we don't get into the tax returns and the internal financial statements, but they are a part of the contingent letter of intent. That letter of intent says, I will pay this much for this business based on what I know, and this is how I will pay for it. This much down payment, this much in third-party financing, and Mr. Seller, I'd like for you to do some financing to demonstrate goodwill. As long as, and this is where the contingencies come in, as long as I get to examine and approve the last 3 years of financial statements, I get to examine and approve the furniture, fixture, and equipment list, and then you have somewhere between 8 and 10 contingencies. so that when the buyer signs that letter of intent, that contingent letter of intent, they're not buying the business, they're proposing to the seller saying, would you like to get married? If you do, these are the contingents. So it's kind of like a prenup. I'll do this if these things are proven to be true. So the contingent letter of intent is a very important component to a deal. Amy? And we facilitate due diligence. Remember, I said that they haven't seen the tax returns. Now's the time to get into the tax returns. Our due diligence books are somewhere generally about that thick, because they contain leases, tax returns, P&Ls, equipment lists, key employee information. Everything that a buyer wants to know about that business is contained in the due diligence book. Then we have the due diligence meeting with the seller and the buyer, where the two of them go through these documents, so that if the buyer has a question, the seller is able to explain, oh, those dues that you see there, well, they're the Fayetteville Country Club. That's where I take my family. And it's not a necessary thing for the business, but here's the expense. This is what we do. So due diligence, we walk them through that in a way that allows the buyer to get all their questions answered. We store those due diligence documents also in a confidential deal room, and we will make them available to the buyer's CPA and their attorney as well. Due diligence is where most business deals fall apart, but the way that we do due diligence, 90+% of ours once get through due diligence because of the way we've prepared things. Amy? John, you want to pick that up?
Yeah. Then next is the fun part. You always hear about, oh, that deal fell apart at the closing table or whatever. That's never happened with us, and the reason for that is because we're so prepared ahead of time. Everyone's seen the documents. Everyone's attorneys have seen the documents. We've made the necessary tweaks. We have the third-party closing attorney, so there's no one-sidedness there. And we just host the meeting. It sometimes takes 10 or 15 minutes, and we celebrate. We might have a donut like we did on Friday. And we just make it a fun process. And it really is the beginning of something for two people, for the buyer and the seller. It's the beginning of something new. So we celebrate that.
Hey, one thing I wanted to add on that, as you guys are helping folks, or anybody's helping somebody as they are acquiring a business, we're doing a lot of that back work on several of those same kind of clients, helping them not only understand the financial aspect of it, but I spend a lot of time with folks on, let's talk through the first 100 days of owning that business. And how is it, what does it look like? How are you going to have input to it? What are your first actions going to be in doing a lot of that kind of work? And then also how they're going to market it maybe differently than the previous owners. So that's how you can see that we can work hand in hand with the with folks like CBI.
Yeah, Mary Beth, I would also add to that is that, one of the biggest things that buyers fear is losing the employees. And, we have language and things that they can do, and we can talk them through that meeting with those employees, so that the employees leave that meeting not wanting to leave the company, but wanting to be a bigger part of it.
Fantastic. And we do have some, again, you all are keeping some great questions flowing, and I think that that's wonderful. Some of the questions will be answered. So if they're not, we are keeping an eye on those, and we'll interject those as we go along here. So thank you for keeping those coming, and we are keeping an eye on those. I appreciate that very much.
Amy, one quick question I might ask John and Carl. This is quite an involved process, and you provide a wonderful service. The question is, it's probably not for free. What are the fees that are charged as part of this, and how does that get accounted for?
That's always one of the first questions that we're asked is, what are your fees? And we love the attorney answer to that. Well, it depends. And it really does. There is no charge, there is no obligation and no charge for the first initial steps of this, where we sit down with the seller, we gather the documentation, we pre-screen, we meet with the seller, we determine if we can help the seller. At that point, we will then outline a fee structure for what we do. Now, I have to tell you, Catherine, that what John would be 60 or 70% of the businesses that approach us, we don't end up taking them to market because they're not ready at that time.
I would say, yeah, 60 at least.
Yeah, we want to, if we can't help a business owner achieve their objectives, we're going to step back from that and we're going to tell the seller that. So the fee will depend on the project itself. You know, is the seller able to gather the information? Is it a business that we can help achieve their objectives? If it is, then we'll lay out a contingency fee, and everything we do is contingent. Now, we're not like attorneys. Anybody know what an attorney's contingency fee is? It's usually 30 to 60%. Ours is nowhere near that. We work for a much smaller number than that, and we're paid on success. Now, sometimes we will have a retainer to begin this. You saw this process we go through. So we'll have a retainer that we charge on the front end, depending on the complexity of the transaction. And that retainer can range from a couple of $1,000s up, depending on what the complexity is and the way that we have to market this business. We sometimes spend a lot of money on the front end marketing these because we can't put a sign out in front of the business for sale. I know that's kind of a broad answer. John, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just say that one thing that differs from a lot of other types of businesses like this, particularly real estate, is that we don't do dual agency. We only work for the seller. I still, for the life of me, can't figure out how a real estate agent can represent both sides of a deal. That's and maybe it's just because I've got this perspective of it, but we only work for one side or the other. Almost always we're working for the seller. Sometimes buyers will hire us to work for them to help them find the exact business they want. But we only work for one side or the other. So that helps protect you.
That is fantastic. Before we go on to the next question, I'm just going to let you know that at time check, we've got about 30 minutes left. And I think that that was a huge question, Catherine, that was building up on our chat and our Q&A. So we're glad that we got that taken care of. And again, keep putting the questions in there and we will make sure that we have time for them at the end. Mary Beth?
Yes, I just was curious about the whole acquisition process because that's what I deal with primarily. Almost all of our clients that are in that kind of process, they're looking really for what do I need to, I have this much money. I'm a retired, but very young retired executive from a large company, and I'm just looking to see what I can do to be my own boss. So can you guys kind of run through with everybody what the I know we've talked about timing and they can't be in a hurry, but what do they need to understand? I mean, I'm a former banker, so I always think about, yes, we want to see 3 years of tax returns, 3 years of internal financials, year-to-date financials, those kind of things. But I just want you all to explain from your perspective what you want to see. And then also let's talk through this whole valuation, because as an old banker, a lot of banks require formal valuations. And so I'm just curious of your take.
Sure. Well, first off, let me just say that we treasure the relationship that we have with you guys and Mary Beth. We're so happy to work with you, and we kind of end up talking to a lot of the same people. And so that gives us something in common, and we're happy about that. The typical business acquisition, I guess probably one of the biggest things that we see, and Carl mentioned it earlier, is that very seldom does someone buy the first business that they inquire on. And so there's a process to follow to help them find the right thing. And we hear a lot of times people say, well, I just want something that makes money. Well, yeah, we all do. But it's a grueling process. And so it needs to be something that you have passion about. And you can't necessarily be in a hurry. And the other thing I would say to caution a buyer is that corporate environment that you came from that had, GAAP financials, generally accepted accounting principle financials, and they you're used to seeing that incredible amount of financial detail. Don't expect that from a small business owner, because they don't have it. And that's not how they don't operate a lot of them don't operate their business by the numbers. So Carl, you can add to that, I'm sure.
Hey, before Carl goes, I'll step in and add for you really quickly. That's a really good point, John, because, you know, again, as an old banker, I always thought everyone had their financials together and in place. So both from the buyers and the sellers perspective, I think it's really interesting, because buyers then think, oh, well, then they'll just give me their year-to-date financials. And if it's September 30th, then I for sure should be able to get August 31. And I sure do hope that we've helped people understand that they need to be able to have access to that through their QuickBooks, but so many don't, and they're just trying to get there and understand. So then they're making decisions based on 9-month-old information.
Yeah, that's a big issue. But our process, Mary Beth, is that before we ever take an engagement, that checklist information, we're going to have all that information from the business owner. And then we get the business owner to provide us with updated financials on a monthly basis, at least quarterly, but monthly is our preference. So we're getting those numbers and updating that file. So the sellers are providing ongoing information, because a business is a living thing. Then we do the same thing with a buyer. When a buyer comes in and makes an offer, a contingent letter of intent that's accepted, we collect all the buyer documentation, 3 years of their personal tax returns. We help them with their business plan, which I know you do as well. We put all that information together so that rather than being reactive in getting the business ready to close, we're proactive in doing that, so that we've got all that information gathered together. The business acquisition process from a buyer's perspective, it can be greatly simplified by following a plan. But most buyers, never having purchased a business before, they don't know. And if they don't have somebody to guide them, remember that buyer discovery process we talked about? That's where we lay down the path for them, so they'll understand this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and this is how it works. So business acquisition, and it's slowed down a little bit now. And the primary reason, Mary Beth, is the lenders. The things that have happened with PPP loans and some of these other things, these lenders are having a real tough time processing acquisition loans because they're so busy with everything else. But, you know, we tell people, once you have an offer that's accepted, it generally will take 45 to 60 to 90 days to get that deal closed. The way that we, even with the efficiencies that we can help bring to the table, it takes a while to do.
So on that valuation, who do you recommend that if the bank is going to require a third-party valuation, what do you guys then do? Who do you refer your clients to?
John, you want to take that, or you want me to?
Yeah, we use a company called Gulf Coast, and they've been doing certified third-party valuations for us for quite a while. Sometimes lenders will have their own preferred valuation company that they want to use, so it kind of depends. But most of them are familiar with Gulf Coast and will use or update Gulf Coast's evaluation for that process. So that's one way of doing evaluation, and we don't always need a certified valuation. It just depends on the business. Usually what we'll do is, using a number of resources, reference guides and comps and all kinds of things, we can help the owner decide on what his price is. And then we can help them do the math to make sure that that business is priced reasonably, so that it will pay for itself, pay its new owner a reasonable salary, and have some money left over for capital expenditures and so forth. So sometimes that's the way to sort of check our work on valuations, is make sure it'll work for the buyer, and does it cash flow at that price?
Right. That's what we do.
We've got a worksheet we created that really helps with that.
We do that same kind of work. Sorry to interrupt you, Carl.
No, you're fine.
So I can totally relate. But the bankers sometimes require it, but then sometimes don't. But if we have enough information in there for them to understand how it's going to cash flow post acquisition, then they've taken it a lot of times.
Right.
Here's a tip too. By the way, Gulf Coast, about 12, 14 years ago, I told the owner, I said, you got to change the name of your company. Gulf Coast doesn't play in the Ozarks. So he changed it to GCV Valuation, John. So we got to start calling him GCV.
I still call it Gulf Coast.
I still call it Gulf Coast too, just because I remember it from forever
But
ago.
Darren Mize will tell you it's GCV now. But because of the process that we use with a confidential deal room, where we upload all of the seller information, and you heard us go in detail into that information, we give GCV or the valuation company access to that deal room. So instead of having to ship documents back and forth between wherever the valuation company is located, we can expedite that process down to where it takes less than 2 weeks to get a certified valuation if it's necessary. But
That's
John,
right.
What percentage of ours require valuation? 10, 15?
Oh, I would say most of the time we don't do a valuation at the time of listing. I'd probably 90% of the time we do not. We do know that it's with most lenders and lenders in the SBA, if there's over a certain dollar amount of goodwill, they're going to require one. So, we kind of know going in. And another thing to add to what Mary Beth said is that we provide the buyers with a template for a business plan and help them through that business plan so that they can see what's going to happen when they're the owner of that business. So it's just something that we do. Again, we're working for the seller, and by doing that, we're helping the buyer.
Yeah, and I would add, Mary Beth, that valuation of a business is an extremely difficult and detailed thing to do. There's art and science involved in it. They're numbers, and we speak that language very well. There are also unknown factors. That's why I hate rules of thumb. Rules of thumb do not work in valuing businesses, and we often get that question, well, my cousin, third time removed from Kennesaw, sold his business for X, what's mine worth? Instead of looking at, is your business in Northwest Arkansas? Is it in the construction business? What's happening in the real estate market in Northwest Arkansas is not like it is in Chicago. So every business has a value that takes in more than just the numbers. It has to do with a lot of other things that are going on.
That's fantastic.
My next question I wanted to talk about was on seller financing. Most people who we end up visiting with, it takes a little bit before they'll understand how often seller financing needs to be involved. So, I bet of the deals I look at, well over 50% end up with some kind of seller financing, albeit the bank, obviously, if there's a bank involved, the bank will have the seller subordinate to the bank debt. But for the right deal, it's really beneficial to both sides. So what do you guys see?
Yeah, so for one thing, the SBA almost always requires some seller financing. But one of the things that we run into with sellers is when you say the word seller financing, the first thing that pops into their head, I think, is, oh, you want me to finance someone who can't get money at the bank. You're wanting me to take someone that has subprime credit and finance my company to them. I don't want to do that. And the next thing that pops into their head is, well, what happens if they default? So they're thinking like a banker, Mary Beth. What's the worst case scenario? And that's okay. So what we need to help them understand is that we can structure the deal so that they have as much protection as possible, and that it may make sense for them to finance somebody that the bank would love to finance. We won't ask them to finance somebody the bank doesn't want. We want them to finance somebody all the banks are dying to do. And so by doing that, we can give them some really good advantages on a tax basis and an ongoing basis. And as Carl said earlier, a lot of sellers would rather have the income than the money.
Another thing.
I often say to the sellers that, heck, it's a much better deal. I mean, if they can get part of it cash up front, and then especially if they're retiring, then it's pretty much like an annuity. I mean, if it's a 7-year or a 10-year deal, it's just like having an annuity at a higher rate. It's not like they can get a lot of interest these days. So it seems to work really well for both sides.
It really does. And remember, we talked about goodwill earlier. Mary Beth, how many lenders will finance goodwill as a standalone?
I wouldn't like to answer that.
So who's going to finance the goodwill value? Well,
The seller.
Mr. Seller, it's going to need to be you. You want to get paid for it? Well, it's goodwill, and the goodwill is an intangible asset. Owner financing is the way that most sellers get paid for the goodwill of their business. Now, sometimes if you talk to the SBA, and by the way, just for those who aren't familiar, that's the Small Business Administration, which is a guarantee to the lenders of a percentage of the value of that loan. The SBA says they will finance because they say they're a cash flow lender, but they're not. The banks are going to want some collateral, but goodwill is a way to get that financed. And it really helps bridge that gap between the hardest assets and collateral of a business and the real value of the business, which includes the goodwill and other intangible assets.
Hey guys, I feel like we have Amy with only 12 minutes left. I want to make sure we get through the parts that they want to get through, but also that we make sure that we get our listeners' questions answered.
I was thinking the same thing.
We'll move quickly.
Okay. Do you want to go on to this one, Mary Beth?
I feel like if you guys, Carl and John, could figure out if there are specific things you could discuss in the next 4 minutes, then we could make sure we get everybody's questions answered.
Yeah.
I'll just add that valuation is coming up over and over and over. So if we can make sure that we spend
really
time and get
discuss
questions. Yes, please.
Yeah.
All right, so I think if we could probably skip this slide because we've talked about that quite a bit. Let's skip this one too, because I think that we can cover that when we're talking about valuations. The next one is most businesses are valued as a multiple of discretionary earnings. Not all businesses are valued that way, but many are. And so how do you calculate that discretionary earning? And I tell people that one time I had an auto repair shop, and there was $3,700 on their tax return or on their P&L for ballet lessons. Well, not one mechanic in that shop knew how to do ballet, but the owner's daughter was really good at it. So, those discretionary things like that, we add those back to the bottom line, so to speak. And we add back the regular things of EBITDA, which I'm sure you all know what those are. So, and then owner's salary and the other benefits that the owner draws from the company. And that's how you the number is what is the real financial benefit that the seller or owner is receiving from that company. And that's the definition of discretionary earnings. Carl, you want to add to that?
Well, that's a great summary of it. I do know that there was one particular business that we sold a few years ago. When I got started on the recast, I started with their tax return, and their tax return taxable income was $70,000. When we went back through the financials and the tax returns, and we ended up finding a real SDE of $740,000 for that business. So, if you're going to do seller's discretionary earnings, number one, it takes somebody with skill to be able to sit down and recast those, and to also make sure there's a paper trail that is approvable documentation of those add backs. You don't just say, well, I think I spent this. You got to be able to prove it, because the buyer, borrower, CPA, lender, bank, they're going to want to know about those real numbers. So the SDE becomes the number that most Main Street businesses, now EBITDA is going to be important for lower middle market businesses. They're going to work off of EBITDA, not SDE. But some multiple of SDE is going to be the value depending on a number of other factors. So that's the number that we really dig hard for to find.
Hey guys, one thing that we see all the time are people coming in and they say, hey, my brother-in-law sold his company for 5x, and so I think I should be able to get this amount. How do you make sure that you are explaining to your clients to get realistic expectations of what they should be able to get in a sale or for a purchase?
John, can I handle this one?
Please.
We've created a tool we call the Seller's Discretionary Cash Flow Worksheet, where after we've gone through the work of gathering and coming up with SDE, and we don't just look at last year, we look at a historical number, we do some averaging of the SDE over at least a 3-year period to come up with an average SDE. Then we take the collateral value of that business, and real estate always skews that, but we take those assets into consideration. We plug those into a worksheet that we've come up with. We show a reasonable buyer cash down payment, and then what a lender will loan on that business, because we know based on the ratios what lenders are going to do on the assets in terms of a loan. And then we come up with a purchase price. So we kind of back into the value by working the numbers of the business, looking at a reasonable down payment, looking at what a third-party lender would do, and voila, there is a purchase price that either makes sense or doesn't make sense. So when we have somebody like that comes in, Mary Beth, and they've got some inflated idea about their business, we'll plug that value in, and then we'll show them what a deal looks like. And if that deal is upside down, which it generally is when you start going 5 times something, then it'll show that seller, this is what a deal looks like, because that's what we do every day. John, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, there's art and science to determining the value of a business, and that's the scientific part of it. And, you know, the other part is, you know, a tech company might go for 20 times top line. A restaurant might go for 20% of top line, and other businesses go on a percentage of discretionary earnings. But you can't pay for a business on top line. You pay for business with what's left over. So that's what we're trying to determine and help sort of, as Carl said, back into a price that makes sense.
I'm going to go ahead and shift us into just kind of Q&A mode here, make sure that we're getting everybody's questions, and then we'll go back to the last few slides of the presentation to talk a little bit more about what you offer, even though I think you've done an amazing job of overviewing all of that. So Catherine, what are some of the things that we see coming up? And I do see an attendee with their hand up. You're welcome to type that into the Q&A, or if it is something that you absolutely have to say, we can save that for just a little bit, and I can enable your voice. So Catherine, what are you looking at?
Hey, one of the questions is, how do you value a service business that has recurring revenue but low inventory? How much does sales volume play in the sales price? And their business is looking at sales of about $1 million plus in annual average over the last several years.
John, you want to tackle that?
Sure. So, you know, the first question is, you know, how do you value that based on assets or whatever? What I was thinking about was a story that we had not too long ago of a company that we put on the market for $3.5 million. The total asset value of that company was $240,000. That's a service-based business. And so they had some tools and some other equipment. So how do you sell a company that has $240,000 in assets for $3.5 million? The answer is they were making $1 million a year. So when you're making $1 million a year, it's a multiple of that earnings, and that's how a service business, as well as any other business, is valued. And I'll just add that service businesses right now are really hot because you can't buy a service on Amazon.
That's terrific. Another question we had is about, are there any nuances to selling a franchise business that make it more complicated?
Carl?
I wouldn't call it any more complicated. It's just it's a process. I was part of the ownership group for another major business brokerage franchise. We had 240 offices around the world and handled a lot of franchise sales through that. Resales of franchises, in my opinion, as one of my pastors used to say, in my humble but highly accurate opinion, franchise resales are the best to sell. If you get a good business that has a good, strong franchisor behind it to help a new business owner, 90% of whom have never been in business for themselves before, and you have an existing business with existing cash flow, and you have a seller who will help train that buyer, that's the best of all worlds. Nuances are, it takes longer. It's a little more expensive because most of the franchise companies are going to have a training period. They're going to have some fees associated with transferring that. Get your FDD out, your financial document from the franchisor. Read through the transfer. There's sometimes surprises in those documents. So when we see that there's a franchise that's looking to sell, we ask for a copy of that franchise disclosure document so we can go through it and find out if there are any traps and there are any tricks we need to be afraid of or careful about.
And there's an approval process usually. So you not only have to be approved by the seller and the lender, but also by the franchisor.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank
our
you.
most recent client who was purchasing an existing franchise, it was a fitness business. And I mean, it was a great deal because they had the original franchisee had already paid a lot of the upfront fees. And this particular franchisor wasn't charging anymore. But then the purchaser had already had 100+ members, and that was keeping it and making some good money. So that really, really worked out well for her.
Yeah. One thing I'd caution anybody that owns a franchise, and this comes from personal experience, don't expect the franchisor to sell your resale, because guess what they'd rather do? They'd rather sell a new franchise. So you don't count on them to help you with your resale. You better go look for somebody else to help you do a resale.
Great, that's really helpful. Another question is, they have a commercial building that could or could not go with a business. Do you find businesses to sell easier without a building price added or no?
John, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, so it can go both ways. Some businesses are so tied to their location, or their facility is so integral in what they do, like a manufacturing company or whatever. That facility is laid out exactly for that purpose. But almost always, a company that has an established location is worth more than one that's going to have to move. So if you can keep the location, a lot of times, a lot of sellers would like to sell the business and then lease the property to the new owner. That's, again, a way for them to get some income from it with very low risk. And so, it's a lot of times it's easier for the buyer to buy just the business and then later on buy the property. So it's kind of a two-stage thing. And it depends largely on what the business is.
Yeah, in most cases, the seller is better off holding on to the real estate. In most cases, the buyer is better off with the real estate because that's additional collateral for a loan. But we'll examine the seller's financial situation. And sometimes we'll say, Mr. Seller, you need to lease this to minimize your tax issues that you're going to have on the sale. And the buyer will often come back and pay a lease with an option to purchase, and some of the lease price being built into the lease, so that there's a sinking fund, an escrow fund is kind of set up. And if the buyer exercises that option, they get credit for that, those payments some of the payments that they've made. So there are a lot of ways to do that that's beneficial for the seller and the buyer.
Perfect. And then the other question is, if they've been in business for less than 2 years, what are the implications of selling their business?
Let me tackle that one, John. It's more difficult. The longer the track record, the better. 2 years is not bad, though. We've had people come in and try to get us to sell them 6 months after they went into business, and that's a distress situation. It's not good. 2 years is not bad if they've got 2 years that they can provide good financials for. The longer the history, the better. But 2 years is sufficient. You can generally work with that. John, you got anything to add to that?
No, I'd say that, that is usually enough. And, we have one seller that we're actually working for right now, and that's kind of his plan. He buys one and fixes it up and sells it 2 years later. So yeah, a lot of it has to do with the nature of the business, and it has to do with how well you keep your books. Keep good books.
Yes.
We have one more question, Ed. I'm going to allow you to talk. Just take a a quick one because we've only got about a minute for this question, both question and answer. So here you go. You want to, if you unmute, then you'll be able to ask your question, Ed.
If that's who I think it is, I'm looking forward to this one.
Ed, if you'll unmute, then we'll be able to ask the question.
Do I unmute them, or does
Nope.
he unmute himself?
No, Carl, it's all right. He'll have to do it. Okay. All right, well, we'll go back and we will get back to our presentation and let you all finish up. Thank everyone for asking questions, and the benefit of being part of being here today is that if you do have a few questions after time is up and we are done recording, then you can stick around for just a few more minutes. So if Carl and John, if you want to walk a little bit through what CBI offers, and then we will finish up and hope to see everybody next time.
John, take a quick run at selling. I'll do a quick one at buying, and then I'll close us out.
Okay. Obviously, we sell businesses. That's our slogan. We sell businesses, and so that's our primary function. We spend 90% of our time selling businesses. That's our bread and butter.
We do on occasion are hired to represent buyers. You remember I mentioned a $30 million transaction that we did. That was actually working for a buyer from Singapore. They hired us through a unique program we created called TAP, Target Acquisition Program. So we did work for the buyer on that one, identified a number of targets, and we ended up buying the one in Minneapolis. Access to capital. We found that it's really difficult to get business acquisition loans. And so what we did was we came up with a program that has over 80 lenders in it, so that when we get our deal room set up with the seller's information, the buyer's information, and the deal information, we shop that deal to over 80 lenders, and within 48 hours, we typically have anywhere from 6 to 20 proposals from these lenders, which means that 99% of the time our deals are funded because of this unique program. And then the last thing I'll mention is that with the onset of COVID, we knew that there were going to be changes in the marketplace, and we wanted to get out in front of those. So we've got some other services that we provide, such as a live auction program. We also do confidential auction programs. We have other services that you can find on our website to help people wherever they are in the stage of their business. But in particular, we've got this tool that we call Value Builder to help people get ready to sell their businesses 2 to 5 years ahead. It is a wonderful program to help them get more value out of the sale of their business if they'll start planning ahead. Thank you all so much for allowing John and me to participate in this. It's been a real blessing. Thank you.
It has been wonderful to have you, and your information is up here. And so with follow-on questions, I'm sure that you are happy to take those and answer as you can. Thank you all for participating. We also want to thank you as ASBTDC for being part of today. We can also be found on wherever you are Googling. As a registrant of this attendee and this webinar, you will be emailed a copy of this presentation, as well as a brief survey that will help us continue to serve you with these quality programs. Find a full listing of our workshops. You can find us at sbtdc.uark.edu, or you can take a little snapshot of that QR code and sign up for notifications or become a client. As you know, we have a great bevy of partners like CBI that we love to work with, and we love to work with you to be ready for them. So we're also posting on social media, so follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So please stay in touch and stay tuned for upcoming workshops. So we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you again all for being here. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you. So glad to be here.